And she goes, my family's familiar. I was like, no way, that's cool, small town, whatever. You all know the same people. And they knew like all the same people.
Yeah.
And she was like, oh yeah, I think they're like first cousins. And I was like, what?
First cousins might be a little close.
She was,
But if you go far enough back,
yeah,
you're going to be related
I
in
was-
some way.
But she was like, oh no, it didn't happen. They were just good friends in high school. I was like, I was so scared.
Yeah.
I was like,
I always to see like.
I was like, no, this ain't gonna work.
I'm not sure
This
this
is not gonna work.
All right, so here we go.
I probably would.
It's actually good. I was
Oh, you're
probably
pulling
someone
it.
Yeah.
30 minutes and then I really.
You need this.
It was like second or third cousin jump ability.
Look at all the
like
cousins
not-
around Crawford.
First argument. All right, does anybody remember what our first argument is going to be, our first version?
Spring match.
Yeah. God exists. No, he doesn't. All right. All right, our first version is going to be a version of this. Our first argument, rather,
Cosmological.
is going to be this. Now, why again are we starting this? Because this is probably going to be one of the easiest to follow right off the bat, right? Now, again, hopefully you've read your book in regards to his versions of the cosmological argument that he critiques. And so what we're going to have to see is, one, that already gives you some fodder to shoot back with in regards to objections, right? But at the same time, you'll be able to see if you think those objections are applicable to this argument, because, again, unfortunately, as we've already kind of discussed, it looks like that a lot of the objections he's offered aren't even applicable to the particular argument. Now, there will still be aspects that will be pertinent to this, and then again, we'll have to see how those work out in relation to it. So, right now, we're not going to give Aquinas' version. I'll talk about that if we have time. Hopefully, we'll have time about that, like Aristotle's, Aquinas', their versions of the argument. Hopefully, we'll have some time to talk about that. Right now, we're going to go with the argument that's probably one of the most popular arguments right now in regards to this one. This is one of the big ones that's usually offered up in like philosophy of religion debates on whether or not God exists. So this is called a cosmological argument. The version of this particular argument is the one that's been made has been revitalized, as we talked about the other day, by this guy over here, remember Craig. So this is going to be one of his particular versions. Now this version has been adopted by not just him, but all kinds of philosophical theists across all kinds of spectrums. So even Islamic philosophers and theists have adopted this argument. Jewish, any theistic type of believer has adopted this kind of argument because it works for any of those. Huh?
You're too complex. Buddhism is.
Well, no, this would destroy Buddhism if this argument works. Buddhism wouldn't be true, and you'll see why. So the first premise of the argument, remember what we got to do is we got to construct a syllogism, right? So the syllogism is, first premise is what? Everything, what? Does anybody think they know what the first premise will be?
Was created.
Everything that begins to exist has a cause. I'm not going to, I'll run out of room, so I'm just going to put as a cause. All right, so does anybody remember what the first premise in your book is that he lists as the first premise for this version of the cosmological argument? In fact, he actually kind of blends, like mixes up 2 or 3 different versions.
It has cause.
Yes, it's supposed to be has a cause, yeah, but I just ran out of room, so I just put cause right there. Everything that begins to exist has a cause. All right, does anybody remember what he says for the first premise in the book? When he's about to critique this argument or give this argument?
Is it everything is caused by something higher?
Is that what it says? Is that what he has listed out? He has it in syllogism form, in the form of a syllogism there.
Yeah, it's like 3, 4.
Right. So, is that what it says, Madeline?
I'm on 77.
Page 77?
Yeah, that was 4.2.
All right, and that's on 77, right?
He said,
All right, so everything is caused by something prior in the causal chain. Do you see why that premise is already wrong? That's easy. Like, you're done. Like, if that's it, then you can defeat the argument right there. But sadly, what? It's not the premise, right? And we'll get to why that's not the premise, because that's easily what? That's easily tossed out, right? Kicked out, debunked. That's easy, right? Again, that's not the argument though. That's the problem. This is the premise. Everything that begins to exist is a cause. In fact, this isn't even Aristotle or Aquinas' first premise. You see what I'm talking about when I was like, man, are you in the literature? Because this isn't even what anybody's arguing. Remember what we talked about, logical fallacies. Remember this over here? What's this little guy? I'm not a big artist, but essentially, what's this little thing right here? Here's a bird. A straw man, right? It's easy to construct a straw man and then what? Beat it down, because straw men will fight back, right? But when you have to argue with the actual argument, it's more difficult, right? That's not the real argument. This over here. Everything is caused by something prior. Everything. Well, all right, that's easy to defeat. Here's the real premise, or this real version of this cosmological argument. Because remember, Aquinas' and Aristotle's version isn't even that, right? That's why it's kind of frustrating in this particular text, because that's just not the premise. So anyway, the first premise is everything that begins to exist has a cause, not that everything prior, or everything prior has a cause, because then we'll see where that goes in a second. Anyway, what's the second premise in this argument? The universe, what? Universe began to what? Began to exist. Everything begins to exist as a cause, the universe began to exist. Therefore, what's your conclusion? Right. Therefore, that's right. Therefore, the universe has a cause. Or you can say had a cause. Now, by itself, where's my little eraser? Now, by itself, does this really look like it does anything? By itself, when you just look at these premises. You're like, oh my gosh, God exists. Right? No. And so that's one of the crazy things about this little argument is that it's so unassuming. But then when you start to unpack it, what? That's where it gets its power, so to speak, right? Especially when you start to try to draw the implications of this conclusion here. So what we have to do to make this argument work, is this valid? Does it break any of the logical rules? No, it doesn't break any logical rules, right? Any formal rules, like undistributed middle, illicit minor term, illicit major term, did I say already undistributed middle, something like that. It doesn't break any of those specific rules. Major term in the major premise, all that sort of stuff. So what we have to do then, if it's valid, if it's logically valid, then what do we have to do? We have to go after the premises, right? We have to see if because remember, if this is true, right? And if this is true, then what? Remember, this is a deductive argument. What happens with deductive arguments? What kind of conclusions do deductive arguments yield? Certain, whether you like it or not, right? If this is true, and if this is true, what about this?
It's true.
Whether what? Whether you like it or not, right? So, if you don't want this, if you don't want the conclusion, remember what do you have to do? In an argument, what do you have to do if you don't want the conclusion? If it's logically valid, what do you have to do if you don't want the conclusion? You have to show that what? That either this is false, or what? Or this is false, right? Remember, that's the only way you can get out of this in a logically valid argument, right, or syllogism. So, this is what we're going to have to defend for the most part. The theist is going to have to defend that these two premises are true, right? That's what he's going to have to go after in order to defend this argument. So let's look at this argument first, and then we'll go to some of these particular objections to these two premises. Because remember, the non-theist has to show that one of these is false, right, in order to get out of this conclusion, right? And then obviously, even furthermore, the implications of this particular conclusion. So let's look at this one. Everything that begins to exist has a cause. In order to get out of that, what would we probably have to do first?
Sure that something exists but doesn't have a cause.
Right. We'd have to say, well, maybe something doesn't. Maybe things exist that don't have a cause. Right. Now, you would think that most people are going to just say, well, I'm not going to argue against this, right? But there are actually some that try to argue against that. Because most people are going to go after this one. This is where we'll spend bulk of this particular argument, talking about this premise. So a couple just quick toss outs as to why most people don't spend a lot of time on everything as a cause is because the first implication is that if you throw out the law of causality or the principle of causality, you simultaneously have to throw out what? You essentially flush something down the toilet. What is that going to be for the most part? You're going to flush science down the toilet. Why?
It's based on not just causality, but the predictability of the world.
Right, or as Francis Bacon used to say, science just is the search for causes. You know, like the how. How does this do this? How does this work? Why does it rain? Well, the cause. You know, the whole cyclical process. Like we're finding the search for causes. That's what science just is. Trying to figure out how things are. Why does it rain? Why is it lightning? Why does, when this happens, why does this happen over here? How do we cure cancer? Well, if we do this, this causes cancer. Like the whole thing is just a search for cause and effect relationships. So if we try to toss this out, and now we don't have any connection between causes and effects, and we toss out literally the whole scientific method, because the scientific method just relies on that. That's just what it is, and it's the search for such things, right? So it doesn't seem like, at least right now, that we want to throw this out, right? At least for right now, I want to say, look, yeah, I want to say that everything that begins to exist has a cause. All right, now another reason for this is because right now, as Leibniz pointed out, well, if things that come into be, if things can come into be uncaused out of nothing, then why doesn't anything and everything what come into be uncaused out of nothing, right? Like right now, are you worried that right now at your house, uncaused out of nothing, a chimpanzee has popped into existence and is sitting on your counter stuffing your blender with his feces? Like, you're not worried about that, right? Because you're so committed to, well, you're just worried about snuck in. You're just committed because you're committed to what? That things don't just pop into existence out of nowhere, out of nothing, right? That's magic. In fact, that's worse than magic, right? Things don't just pop into being uncaused out of nothing, out of nowhere. Like right now, we're not going to be sitting here doing our lecture, and all of a sudden a Bengal tiger pop into it and start mauling me up here on the thing. Out of nowhere, out of nothing, right? But it's like, right. And as Leibniz points out, he says, but you can't. But if that's true, you can't explain why that doesn't happen. You have no reason to think that things wouldn't just pop into being. Like driving down the road, why wouldn't another car just pop into being out of uncaused out of nothing besides you? If this isn't in play, right? Right? I mean, imagine if you're sitting in a court of law, why did you stab this lady? Well, I was just sitting there, and all of a sudden I was cutting my steak with my knife, and she just popped in front of me out of nowhere, uncaused out of nothing, and it went right into her. He'd be like, here, put the straitjacket on that guy, get him out.
But you stabbed her 87 times.
Right. Well, I was cutting my steak, and she appeared and reappeared, appeared and reappeared, appeared and reappeared. So we don't, at least at first glance, we don't want to get rid of that, right? Right? Now, the second is, well, the universe began to exist. Is there any reason to think this is true? Is there any reason to think this premise is true? So the theist is going to argue, yes, we've got a lot of reasons to think this is true. One, namely, because remember, this is a philosophy class, so I want to hurry up and get to the philosophy, behind this particular behind the defense of this particular premise. But scientifically, there's reason to think that the universe began to exist. What is it?
Oh, that everything is.
It's just called what? What's the name of the theory? The Big Bang, right. So philosophical theists are not going to say, oh, we hate the Big Bang. The philosophical theist is going to love what? The Big Bang. Why? Well, because the Big Bang just says what? All right, go back to Einstein's general theory of relativity. Remember, his theory of relativity essentially called for a beginning to time, space, and matter, right? It predicted that if it was correct, if his theory was correct, that it would call for a beginning to time, space, and matter. It would call for a beginning to the universe as we know it, right? It would have to have a beginning point somewhere at some well, you can't say at some time, and that's where we're getting some of the philosophical implications. But the time, space, and matter, remember, are co-relative, right? Meaning that what? What does it just mean to say that time, space, and matter are co-relative? All right, or another way to say is one can't exist without the other, right? They have, like, time they're correlative. If you have time, that just implies that you have space, which just implies that you have matter, which implies that you have time, right? They're correlative. So time, space, and matter had to have come into a beginning point at some time if his theory was right, if Einstein's general theory of relativity was right. Now, the odd thing is that Einstein wanted the universe to be eternal. He wanted a steady state theory. He didn't like the fact that it called for a beginning. Why? And this is where we get into biases, right? No matter who you are, you have particular biases. He didn't want the universe to have a beginning because of the ramifications that flow from that. You'll see a lot of the astronomers that started to verify his theory didn't want there to be a beginning either, because that seems to verify what? Or a worldview that they don't particularly want to ascribe to, right? They want the universe to be eternal, so they didn't like that at that particular time. Now, a couple different reasons that, long story short, his theory has been proven to be right, at least up to 5 decimal spaces, which is just, uncanny, how accurate it is. And a lot of things came along that confirmed his theory, because remember, a mark of a good scientific theory is that it can predict what? Right, it can predict certain things, right? So if this is true, then that would entail that this has to happen, whatever that this is, right? Fill in the blank. Well, if this is true, well, then this would have to be a result of that. So one of the things of that would be that space itself would be expanding, right? Because if it began, and if it's expanding, and we can think of in a second, we'll shrink that back down, how that makes sense. But anyway, a guy named Arthur Eddington, I think it was Arthur Eddington in 1919, somewhere around that era. Anyway, he discovers the redshift in the galaxies. If you remember anything, from your physics classes or your physical science classes, when light is moving away from you, what happens? There's a redshift in that light, right? And so no matter where he turned the telescope, maybe it was Edwin Hubble. Maybe it was Edwin Hubble, because I think that's the namesake of they named the Hubble telescope after. Anyway, wherever he turned his telescope when he's doing this in his observatory, wherever he faces throughout the galaxy, there's a redshift in the light, which means what? That the universe is doing what? Moving away from us. So if you think of like a balloon, and you put like little dots all over the balloon, or you tape like buttons on the balloon, and you start to blow it up, what happens to the dots? What happens to the buttons on the balloon? They move further and further away from each other, right? But in an equidistant rate, right? They're all moving equally away from each other. Not, one over here at this rate, one over here at this rate, but all at an equidistant rate away from one another, which means what? So if you rewind that and bring that back, if the universe is expanding away from itself or from everything else within it at an equidistant rate, what's that?
It started from 1 point.
Right, that's exactly right. So if you rewind it, it comes back to a singular point, right? Now here's what's crazy about that singular point. Remember, if his theory called for an absolute beginning to time, space, and matter, and you get back to this point that mathematically and logically would be nothing. Now this is where it really starts to rack our head, because when we say nothing, what do we mean?
The non-existence of the universe.
Right, in that sense. But when we say it, what do we mean? Like, hey, what are you doing? Nothing. Yeah, you are doing something. You're breathing or whatever. Right? We can't even comprehend the concept of nothing. Right? Now we're going to go back to our boy Aristotle here, because supposedly it's been allegedly said that Aristotle gave this definition of nothing. Now we don't necessarily know if he did or not, but it's usually just he said. Whoever said it, probably Aristotle, maybe not. We don't necessarily know, but it's a really good definition of nothing or no thing. Does anybody know what he's allegedly to have said? Nothing is that which rocks dream about. Like, you get that?
Yeah.
Nothing is that which rocks dream about. Like, just nothing. Like, no thing, right? I'm not just doing something, but just a little bit of it, but no thing, nothing. So this point, this singularity, this beginning point, tracks back to again a singularity that's mathematically and logically no thing. Now try to imagine that. Nothing. Again, that which rocks dream about. There's just no, like when you watch the Discovery Channel, the History Channel, whatever, and you see the documentary on the beginning of the universe, it'll show like some camera angle, and in the background you see some stars or whatever, and you'll see like well, you can't do that. Why? Because literally, there's no place to view the Big Bang from. Why? Because there's no theme, right? There's not like there's this little spot and you can look at the Big Bang happen, because there's no theme there. There's nothing. That which rocks dream about. There's nothing in existence. And this is what that theory calls for, that this universe would have to shrink back to this point logically and mathematically with no theme. There's nothing. Now, think about this. When they say that the universe is expanding, when they realize it's expanding, it's not expanding into space because there's nothing outside of it. Space is expanding itself. Think about that. It's not expanding like into space. There's nothing. No, they can't even comprehend that, right? That's literally what we call mind-boggling, because we can't even wrap our mind around how the universe could be expanding faster. In fact, it's going at a faster rate. They think it's going faster and faster and faster into nothing from an equidistant rate, all from a singularity, right? From a single point. That was what? Nothing. Not that you have some little rock floating around, not that, because that's something, right? That there's nothing there, all from nothing, and then all of a sudden, something out of nothing, right? A great expanse of light, energy, and heat, and all these things out of nothing. So, not only that, in order to confirm that, a guy named Robert Wilson and something pins this in 1965, I think, they get this radiation on their antennas in New England or Jersey Shore, somewhere around that area. Anyway, they had this radiation. Well, apparently, if the theory of general relativity is true, and if the universe began to exist, well, then that you would have to have what's called a cosmic background radiation, meaning that anytime there's an explosion, you always see what in an explosion? Heat and light, right? There's always heat and there's always light. Now, the light, first they're rearranging their things because they keep getting this radiation no matter where they angle
Well,
their
what it was, they kept getting static.
Right. Some kind of static, whatever. They thought it was like birds or something, all this kind of stuff. Well, it wasn't. Anyway, long story short, they end up discovering this background, what's called background radiation. So, they end up, do you know anything about it? Don't they end up winning Nobel Prizes for it?
They both won a Nobel Prize for this.
Yeah, they end up winning a Nobel Prize because they discover this, basically the leftovers of an explosion, of the universal explosion. Now we can't see the light because wavelengths stretch out over time, right? So right now the light from the explosion is smaller than something like what you would see in your something would be in your microwave. The wavelengths have stretched too far apart, so you can't see the light. Right, but the heat is still detectable, which is what they detected in their, whatever. So they end up winning the Nobel Prize for it. So that's confirmed. Well, then.
You know what's a cool point about that is that
go ahead.
if you have on your TV with static on it, at least 1% of the static is caused by that. That's
right. Calls from the initial explosion in the universe that brought it into existence.
You're actually watching the universe.
Right, or hearing it or something in some way. Now, another thing that they discovered in, I think, 2003 or so, in my early 20s, was that when this happened, in order for gravity to be able to work properly, you had to have loads of material, or not material, but matter, so that the universe could expand out, but then be enough to where it wouldn't collapse back in on itself, right? Because if there's too much, then it goes out too quickly, matter can never form together, collect together to form things like planets and whatever and whatnot. But if it does it too slowly, then the gravitational pull is going to collapse it back in on itself. Something to that effect. And again, that's just a rough shot overview of that. Well, anyway, they end up discovering that when they send out, what was it? Kobe, something like Kobe. And they see these things. Now the crazy thing, this is another just crazy thing about seeing that, when they see that, is anytime we look at something in space, we're actually looking at it in the past, right? Why?
Because light takes time to reach your eye.
Right. It's like, so for instance, I forget what particular star it is, but if you were on that star looking at Earth right now, what would you see? If you were looking on that star,
dinosaurs.
You would see dinosaurs right now, because that's how long it takes the light to reflect back. Because remember, that's how we see, is that light carries the image to our eyes, right?
Like there's some stars in our night sky that we're looking at right now, and we don't know if they're supernova or not yet. They might have already.
Right, or even supernovas they've already been done.
Yeah.
Like when we see a supernova, it's over and done for possibly millions of years. Like it's already gone, but the light's just not hitting our face.
It's the after effect.
Right. So when Kobe sees this gravitational matter or whatever, this matter collected, we're actually seeing into the past, the formation of the universe. So one of the other reasons would be, I wish I'd have to keep touching that thing to make it not go off. Anyway, one of the other things is just the second law of thermodynamics, which is just something to the effect of that energy, well, the first law is that energy can be neither created nor destroyed, right? Really, that's kind of philosophically problematic because if it can neither be, again, if it can't be created nor destroyed, well, then how did it get here, especially if you're right? So now, again, some more philosophers of science are having to say, well, once here, it cannot be created. You can't introduce new energy, and you can't get rid of energy, right? Like it's just what? Stored energy is just called what, scientifically speaking? Matter, right? Just stored energy, right? So anyway, the second law says that there's only, all of that aside, the ramifications, there's a finite amount of it, right? You can't get more into the system, and you can't get rid of it. There's just a finite amount of it, right? Now, if the universe was eternal, if the universe had been here forever, and we're still using energy, what is the implication? We haven't, because the second law is what? The second law is that everything eventually comes to a state of entropy, right? Over time, the second law states, among other things, that eventually everything comes to a state of equilibrium, meaning that you can't use any more energy. It's not usable. This is why I like, when you're in the bathtub, the hot water always will become what? Lukewarm or cold. Why? Because over time, the activity of the molecules and atoms and whatever else running around in the thing, they only have so much energy, right? They can't just, we don't have a perpetual machine, right? You know, even though they've been trying to invent those things since ancient Greece, we don't have them. You only have a certain amount of energy that can be used. So once that eventually fizzles out, it just becomes equal. All the water in the tub becomes equal, at least in temperature, because you can't keep that process up. Energy runs out. But right now, our universe is still running, right? We still have planets in motion. Our sun is still burning. Every star is burning. Light is still traveling. All these sorts of things are still happening. But if we only have a finite amount of that, then what is the implication of that?
You eventually eat that.
Right. Well, eventually we'll get that. But before that, what's the implication? Think of it this way: if you have right now, if Lacey's car outside, if she has a finite amount of gas in her gas tank, right? And we go outside and her car is still running, what does that mean? Well, yeah, it will run out, but if you only have a finite amount and it's still running, we go outside and it's still running, what does that mean? Then it just started, what? A finite amount of time ago, right? Because if you had a finite amount of gas, could it have been running for an infinite amount of time? No, because it would already have been out by now, right? So if the universe is a finite amount of energy and it's still going, then it can't possibly be what? Infinite. Because we're still using the energy. Just like if we go outside and your car's still running, your car couldn't possibly, if you only have a finite amount of gas, your car couldn't have possibly been running from an infinite amount of time because it would already run out of gas by now. But if it's still running and you only have a finite amount, that means what? That it had to have begun at some point, not running from all eternity, right? So the same with the universe. If the universe only has a certain amount of energy, which the second law states, you can't get rid of it and you can't introduce any new energy into it, well then the universe has to have only been running because we're still, lights are still coming on, computers are on. We still have an amount of energy that hasn't reached the state of disequilibrium. Easy for me to say. Disequilibrium. I had a little bit of Jack Daniels before class. Let me just admit that. I'm just kidding. If that's happening, then we can't have possibly had an infinite amount of time before us, right? That's just one of the implications, the implications of the second law, right? Now, so scientifically, and before we get to some of the objections, we're just going to run the argument. So scientifically, we don't want to get rid of this, and it seems like we have really good reason to believe this, right? Just on scientific grounds. In fact, without even having to issue all those supporting evidences for the Big Bang just is the standard accepted norm of how the universe came into being, right? But we just went ahead and tried to at least put some posts up under that, in case there was reason to doubt, say, the Big Bang, something like that, which is what we're going to try to get to in a second. Now, As if that weren't enough, and this is a philosophy class, this is what we care about, is the philosophical argument for this particular premise, right? All right, we got the science. All right, well, let's say Anderson Cooper comes on CNN in the morning and he's like, guess what, guys? Science is all wrong. None of that's true. Huh? Yeah. Yeah, wait a minute. Let me try to look a little better and get my hair wiped. All right. So anyway, he comes on and it's all this, everything's wrong. Everybody, Einstein's a moron. Everybody's just wrong. Oh, by the way, speaking of the Einstein thing, the way he tried to avoid the beginning was he created what's called a fudge factor, and he divided by 0. Well, Russian astrophysicist, I forget his name, cosmologist comes along and is like, hey, look, you divided by 0. You can't do it. Because everybody knows, right? Second graders, you can't divide by 0. And then Einstein goes on later to say, like, yeah, didn't want the beginning to this thing. So anyway, just for your own personal edification. So Anderson Cooper comes on CNN, all the scientists are idiots, it's all wrong. All right, so now do we not have any reason to believe this? No, because we still have the philosophical argument. The philosophical argument, among others, there's all kinds of ways to argue, but the one that usually is run standard with this version is that if the universe were infinite, then you would have to have an actual infinite, right? You have to have an actual infinite. If the universe has been here since infinity, then we have to have what's called an actual infinite, right? Now, what do I mean by that? Do I mean like 300 billion gazillion plus 5, right?
Even beyond that.
Right. 300 billion gazillion plus 5, well, plus one more.
It's like walking down an endless road.
Right, an infinite. This is just what we mean by infinite. Now, an actual infinite, you can't have an actual infinite in the first argument to say that we don't have an actual infinite is this. What is today? Today is the last day of what? Today is the last day. Today is the last day of history up to right now, right? History ends today, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Because we don't have tomorrow yet. So today is the end day of history, right? All time prior. See if we can get this up.
You got it proper.
All right. So all of history goes this way, right? All of history goes this way. And then today is the last day of this collection, right?
Yeah.
Now this has been going forever, for infinity, this way. Infinity, on and on and on and on and on and on. Now, if today is the last day, since we don't have any other day, then what do we have right now?
Finite.
Well, we have an actual infinite, right? We would supposedly have an actual infinite. But the problem is what? You can't add anything to an actual infinite. Why? Why can't you add anything to an actual infinite?
Because it's already here.
Because you've got an infinite. You can't add anything. But can we add another day to right here? We will, right?
Hopefully.
Right? Tomorrow's another day, right? What movie's that? What movie's that? Come on. Gone with the Wind, right? Tomorrow's another, but we'll add tomorrow, when tomorrow rolls around, we'll add another day. But you can't do that to an actual infinite, right?
Because it would already be there.
Right, but we just did, or we will.
Hopefully.
Right, hopefully. Or we don't even have to say tomorrow, we can just say in the next 5 seconds we'll add another what? Another event, but you can't do that. I'll add another one right now, Saturday one. Just add one, Saturday one. Add all kinds of things. Like Norman's film, but we can't do that. You're not supposed to be able to do that. We're doing it. So supposedly, so the argument is that if the universe were an actual infinite, for an infinite amount of age or whatever, then you couldn't do everything we're just doing, but we're sitting here doing it right now. So think about it this way. If there were an actual infinite amount of hats on this table right here, or this desk right here, could I add another hat to it? If they're an actual infinite? No. Right? But I can add another one to it, right? Or I can add another marker, right? I can just continue to do it. Now, here's the problem. All right, we'll say that we're creating one. You can't create an actual infinite. Why? You can't create a why? Because you can always do what Popper said a second ago. Because you can always add one more, right? Like let's say I get to 3,500,000,000,365 whatever, and then what can I do? Add one more, right? But then when I add that one, I can do what? Add another one. I can add another one. I can just add another. I can keep doing it. So you can't quote unquote make. What'd you say, Barbara? Or do I need to hear it? Do I probably not want to know? What did he say?
They got it.
I didn't hear it.
Another one.
I didn't hear it. I'm probably good. So anyway, you're not supposed to be able to create that, right? Hang with me, you juvenile delinquents. So you're not supposed to be able to create that, right? Because you can always do it. So if I told you to go touch an infinite amount of books in the library, let's say there are some, would you be able to do it?
No.
Why?
You could never stop.
Right, because once you get to the last one, you're like, finally, you're like, no,
Here's another one.
another one, right? Now, here's this same argument from a different angle. Here's the same argument from a completely different angle. Have we gotten to today? Are we here?
I hope.
Right. Do you have any reason to think we're not here today? Are we here today? Yeah, we're here, right? Today is here. Now, if the universe went for an infinite amount of time back, only how long could you get to today? Why? One gigantic cluster bomb, right? No, but look, think about it. Why couldn't you get to today on this argument?
It would take an infinite amount of time to get.
Well, and you can't traverse, if you can't go touch an infinite amount of books in the library, because then you can't traverse an infinite amount of days. Why? Think about it this way. This is the best explanation I've heard. Think about dominoes. Let's say today or days are like dominoes, right? Think about them being like dominoes. Oh, no. This is 15 trillion years back. This is 70 trillion, 80 trillion, 90 billion, 700 million, 863 trillion, whatever, right? So if all these are dominoes, right? Now before today, today's the last domino in the series, right? Now what has to happen before this domino gets knocked over? This one has to get knocked over, right? But this one has to get knocked over before this one does, right? Let's go 800 billion back. But before this one gets knocked over, what has to happen? This one has to what? This one has to get knocked over, right? Let's go another 560 billion gazillion days back. All right. Now we're back 15 gazillion years. But before this day happens, what has to happen? The one before it has to what? Happen. But the one before it has to happen. All right, let's keep going back. All right, we're finally here at the beginning, right? No. No, why? Because the one before something. We're dealing with an infinite, right? We just go all the way around. All right, we're finally here. No. Before this one falls over, this must fall over. This must fall over. This must fall over. And we just continue to go down. So really, what does that explain? You don't. If the previous is explained by the previous ad infinitum, this is the philosophical jargon, ad infinitum. If the previous can only be explained by the previous ad infinitum, then you don't have any explanation for anything. Right? Does that make sense? If this has to be explained by this, which has to be explained by this, which has to be explained by this, which has to be, you keep going, well, then really you don't have any explanation at all. Now, are we here? Yeah, we're here. But if all of these dominoes had to fall, but before the first one has to fall, that one has to fall, but that one has to fall, that one has to. But if we're here, then what has to be the conclusion?
There had to be a start.
There had to be a first one, right? Because if you get to the first one and it's infinite, you always have to go one back. Always. Ad infinitum. And forever and ever and ever and ever and ever and ever and ever.
And the brain racking part is that between those there's even more.
Right, there's more events. That's right. Yeah, you could do that. That's a great insight.
If you zoom in, there'll be even more. And if you zoom in, there'll be even more.
Right, because if you zoom in between that, there's events. Like when I was doing all this, there's an event, there's an event, there's an event. There's always, even if it's just not days, there's events, right? But you can't traverse, or you can't have that. You can't traverse an infinite amount of anything because you can't get there because you have to traverse the infinite, right? So this is the first, or this is
That's a good book title, Traversing.
Right, yeah, there probably is. But this is the kind of goofy crap you'll hear like on sci-fi movies. We just traverse the infinite. Here we are, like, we were talking about the other day. I was watching Stranger Things or whatever. I was like, you can do that. Right, and my wife's like, just push play. I don't want to hear that. So, but anyway, so we're going to go, at least right now, we're going to go into our first objection, at least to this one right here, right? Everywhere you want to, in philosophy circles, this is called pain of infinite regress. So you want to avoid, you say, all right, yeah, this can happen, but only on pain of infinite regress. What do you think that probably means? Only if only something can happen, but only on pain of infinite regress.
Pain is in P-A-N-E.
Or it means that your answer is going to entail an infinite regression, right? Which in philosophy you want to stay away from at all costs, right? You don't want to give an explanation for something or some sort of philosophical argument that depends on pain of infinite regression, right? Because as we said earlier, it really makes it like you don't have an explanation for anything.
It's
Right?
impossible.
Right. Well, not impossible, and that's what we're about to talk about. Now, but the way out to get out of this argument for the non-theist, the objection here is, wait a minute, is there anything logically impossible about having an infinite regress? Or is there an inherent contradiction there in saying that there's an infinite regress? Is it logically possible to have an infinite regress?
Not sure.
I'm so confident that
That'll give you both answers.
right. I'll violate the law of non-contradiction right now and say yes and no.
I'll flip a coin.
Logically speaking, is there any logical contradiction in saying that there's an infinite regress is logically possible? No. Logically speaking, there's no logical contradiction in saying that there's an infinite regress, right? Because there's no inherent contradiction. Because logically speaking, you're saying, well, yeah, I'm giving you a cause for this. The cause of this is what? This, right? And the cause of this is what? This. Now the problem is, this is the objection to the objection in philosophy called the defeater to the defeater, is the first defeater to all of this is to say, well, wait a minute, you know there's still no logical contradiction in saying there's an infinite regress. So the theistic side would say, right, there's no logical contradiction. So you can have that as your out. If you want that as your out, you can have it. The problem is it plausible, right? That's the defeater of the defeater is, but is this plausible? Because even though it's logically possible, it's not metaphysically possible, the theist would say, right? The theist would say, yes, it's logically possible, but it's not metaphysically possible for the reasons given. It's not, that is to say, it's not actually possible. So for instance, they would say this. Let's say the non-theist might say, all right, look, I can show you right now how I can traverse an actual infinite. Between these 2 points, you can use your thumb and forefinger just to be, that's more fun, but I'll use this. How many points mathematically are between those 2 points, or between those 2 lines? Or between my thumb and forefinger, how many points are there mathematically here? Right, an infinite, right? Because in order to go here, what do I have to do? I have to go half of here, right? But in order to go half of here, I have to go half of what? I got to go half of that, but I got to go half of that. I got to go half of that. I got to go half of that. I got to go half of that, right? Ad infinitum, right? I've got to traverse, before I can get to this, from my thumb to my forefinger, with my other fingers right here going back and forth, I've got to go half this distance. But I've got to go half of that. I've got to go half of that, half of that, half of that, half of that, half of that. Ad infinitum, forever and ever, right? But look, I'm doing it right now. I'm traversing an actual infinite right here, right? Now, the theist is going to say, right, that's why it's logically possible, theoretically, right? Or, philosophical term, abstractly, but not what? Concretely, or what? Actually. Meaning what? I can't, what if I slice paper as thin as possible? Can I put an actual infinite amount of paper in between my thumb and my forefinger? No, why? Because when I finally fill it up, what can I do? I can always do another one. I can always do another one. Now, are days actual and concrete, right? Or are they just abstract, like numbers? No, they're concrete, right? Days and events are like themes, they're real themes. They're not just, like when I do this, I don't have days in between my fingers, right? Does that make sense? Like I'm not traversing a pretend, this is imaginary, right? This is a mind construct. But days, you'd have to have a real number of them. They would have to be like the paper. Like when we go to tomorrow, that's not an ideology, we're not just thinking that in our head, right? You're actually going to a thing, not abstract, but you're an actual or a concrete, right? So, your out for this is to say it's not logically impossible to have an actual infinite. To come back to that, the response to that is, no, it's not logically impossible. It's just metaphysically not possible or feasible, is another word to say, another philosophical way to say it. It's not logically impossible, it's just not feasible. You can't do it, right, for the reasons given, because before this domino happens, you have to do the one before it, before that, and you just can't do that. That's the comeback to that. Now, some of the scientific stuff to this objection, this is one of the philosophical arguments for it. There's others, but that's probably the only one we won't touch right now, at least the philosophical defense of this premise that the universe began to exist. So you've got the philosophical argument and you've got the scientific argument, right? The Big Bang, all of the evidence points to the Big Bang, and you've got this philosophical argument right here that just simply backs that up. Or actually, the philosophers would say you've got the scientific evidence that what? Backs this up. Like, because you could already know this when? In 1275, right? Remember we talked about, that's the good thing about philosophy. You can start that here now. You don't have to have, you just have to rely on technology, right? You can come up with this, because this is why this is called the Kalam cosmological argument. This is because it started around that era by theists and then picked up and named Kalam by an Islamic philosopher who took it from some earlier Christian theist guys and renamed it the Kalam. So you already had this. So you have some of the other philosophical arguments would be something like if the moons of Saturn, let's just say, does Saturn have moons?
Oh, yeah, sure.
I can't remember. Anyway, let's just say they do for sake of argument. Or let's just say planet X. If the moon of planet X, one, it has two moons. Let's say this one's further out in orbit, right? So it's going to take longer to do what? Right, it's going to take longer to orbit planet X, right? Let's say this one's a lot closer, so it's going to do it what? In what? This is how you'll see how ingenious people were back in the day, like philosophically. Like, this is why I think we're idiotic now than they were. But stuff like this. So look, if this moon rotates around planet X at a faster rate because it's closer, and this one takes a lot longer, let's say it takes twice as long. Let's say it's twice as far out or whatever the physics demand, and it takes twice as long to rotate around planet X. But they've both been doing it for infinity. Which one has done it more? This one goes around faster. This one goes around 2 times slower. But which one has rotated more around the planet? No.
Well, if it's infinity, they both.
If it's infinity, even though this one moves faster and goes around it more, and this one goes slower, but if it's infinity, they've both been around an actual infinite amount, which doesn't seem what? To make any friggin' sense, right? So then you've got mathematician George Hilbert that talks about why we can't have actual infinites. He creates this thing called Hilbert's Hotel. He shows why this whole concept is absurd, why you can't have actual infinites. You can look into that if you want. So anyway, that's part of all of your philosophical reasoning. I mean, think about that. The guy came up with this argument then. Like, that's just, and other ones like that, which again don't depend on technology. But anyway, so your other arguments to get around this is you've got new theories that are trying to compete against the Big Bang, which is odd because all the evidence goes to the Big Bang. But again, they don't like the consequence of there being a beginning. When we get rid of this, they don't want there to be a beginning, right? Because that's a buck stopper. Everything stops if there's a beginning, right? Now, so you've come up with things like the multiverse theory, right? We've got things like at one time, Stephen Hawking proposed what's called imaginary time and basis, but then when you get back to the real world, that imaginary time doesn't work anymore because we're dealing with what? Real time, you know. So you've got some competing scientific theories to this. In fact, when my undergrad, my physics class or physical science class, whatever it was still in play was the cosmic rebound theory, the steady state theory, meaning that, all right, maybe we can have the best of both worlds. Maybe we can combine the Big Bang with what? That it's just been banging for eternity, right? It's called a crunch or whatever. So it bangs and it goes out, and then what? It collapses back in on itself, right? The universe collapses back in on itself, and then what? And then bang, and right, and then keeps doing this for eternity. I don't even want to know what you guys are talking about. So now, banging for eternity. So, turds.
This is your favorite class today.
Right. Now, so what's the problem with the cosmic rebound theory? The first is we don't have any evidence for that, right? All that we have evidence for is the universe exploded out of nothing into what? Into being. We don't have any evidence that it's been doing it forever and ever and ever, right? But let's just say that it has been doing it for infinity. Now what do we run into problems with? All of this stuff that we've already talked about, right? Because cosmic bang, 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 back and forth forever and ever and ever and ever, you're still going to have what? All of this problem, right? Because you would have an actual what? Amount of that. An infinite. But before the first one, that one had to happen, right? But before that first explosion, that one. But that explosion, that one. That explosion, that one.
So that was true, like wouldn't it still be banging?
Well, yeah, that's the problem, is they'd say, so eventually it'll just do it again, but the problem with that was, remember that discovery of where the universe seems to be expanding what? Faster and faster and faster and faster and faster. So if you take a rubber band and stretch it out, when it's about to come back, it does what? It's not getting faster, right? It's slow. And it comes, but that's not what we observed. We observed it's just going faster and faster and faster out into nothing, right? Now, the question may be then, so how does this have anything to do with God? How does this have anything to do with God existing?
Creation.
Not necessarily, because remember, these guys, these philosophical theists believe the Earth is roughly 6 billion years old, and that the universe is roughly 13.5 to 15 billion years old, right? Which just is what modern science says. They're not trying to buck science here, right? In fact, they're just trying to argue that the Big Bang is right, right?
That premise. That premise is destroyed.
So yeah, it's gone. Now, but the question is, all right, now what does this have to do with God then? So, if the universe, if everything that begins to exist has a cause, the universe began to exist, therefore the universe must have a cause. Now, here are the implications from this. The first set, we're going to have two sets. First set is this. Here's your first set of implications. This is going to be your second. I'll have to do this quickly. But, I mean, this is the whole punch of the argument, so I'm sure you want to hear it, right? The first set of implications is if time, space, and matter came into being, then what does that say? If time, space, and matter came into being, cause.
Created, or something caused it to happen.
Well, first we have to come with this. We're either going to have something, right? The universe is something, right? We're going to have something coming from what? Nothing. This is a philosophical no-no, right?
Mm-hmm.
Remember the song? The only thing that comes from nothing is nothing because you can't get nothing from nothing, right? Can't get something from nothing. Or you've got what? Something coming from what? Something. Why? Because of that first principle. You can't, everything that begins, it has to have some sort of cause. If it begins to exist, it can't come from nothing, right? So the Latin is ex nihilo, right? What does that mean? Out of nothing, which has just been the standard what? That's been the standard theistic. No, this has been the standard theistic teaching for centuries and centuries and centuries and centuries, meaning that God what? brought everything into being what? Ex nihilo, out of nothing. So, you either have something bringing something into being from nothing, or you have nothing bringing something into being. Either nothing's doing it, which, again, what is nothing? That which rocks dream about, bringing something into being, or you have something bringing it. Now, if time, here's your first implication from this. If time, space, and matter came into being, then what could you say about this cause? What do you infer about this cause? If this cause brought time into being, then it can't be bound by what? If it brought time into existence, it can't be bound by what? Time. So it would have to be what? If this cause brought material into being or matter into being, it would have to be what? If this cause brings matter into being, it can't be dependent upon matter, meaning what? Huh? Or immaterial, right? If this thing, this being, this whatever brings space into being, it can't be bound by what? Which is just to say what? So it has to be timeless, it has to be immaterial, it has to be infinite in the sense that it's not bound by spatial limitation. Not in this sense down here. Those are two different senses, right? Not bound by spatial limitation. And it would have to be what? If it brought everything that we exist to see as that has power, what would it have to be? If anything that exists has power, all that we exist, if anything exists has power, and it brought everything that comes into being, right, it'd have to be all power. And this is what Aquinas would say, and again, this isn't Aquinas' argument, he's got a whole different, Aristotle's argument will give you the eternity of the universe. He'll say, all right, the universe is completely eternal, but it still needs a cause. And that's a different argument we don't even have time for right now. But, as Aristotle and Aquinas would say, in regards to this, they would say what? This is just what? This is just what everybody means by what? By what? God. Right? To say that this thing, this whatever it is, this cause, this timeless, immaterial, infinite, all-powerful, this is just what everybody means to say when they say what? God. Right? Now, we can break this down into logical categories super quick, and this will be done. Because this is your second set. This is your second set of implications here. You've got three options, logically speaking. Whatever you come up with logically, it's going to fit in these three categories, right? This is why we like logic. It allows us to break stuff down and think. You've either got a self-caused what? Cause. You've got an infinite regress of causes. What's the last one? What's your last option here? Or you've got what? An uncaused cause. Now we've already looked at this one. This one seems to be very problematic, right? So if the universe came into being, right? This option seems to be problematic, unless you want to take the option of, well, there's no logical impossibility, logically speaking. Other than that, that option seems to be problematic, because that's one of your options. You have an infinite regress of causes, which seems to be substantially broad, right, with some sort of difficulty, unless you take your logical out. Now this one here, or we have a self-caused cause. What's problematic about that? That seems to entail a logical contradiction, right? Why? Because something causes itself to exist, well, it must exist in some shape, form, or fashion before it exists in order to cause itself to exist. But if it causes itself to exist, then it can't cause itself to exist because it already existed. Right? So this seems to be logically contradictory. The self-caused cause can't exist for the very reason that if you bring yourself into existence, you've already existed in some prior state. Jean-Paul Sartre, the atheist, pointed that out, right? Or at least helped to help to see that that doesn't work. Now, your last option is this, an uncaused cause, which again would just be what? What everybody, who's Aristotle and Aquinas, those guys would say what? Because you've got an eternal something. Now again, remember, those are your only two options anyway. Why? Those are your only two options anyway. Why? Because either the universe has always existed, which just means to say what? It's eternal, or what's always existed? God has always existed. You've only got two options anyway. That's it. You've either got the universe is eternal, or God, or this other thing is eternal, God. Right? That's it. You can't get out of the options that something is eternal. One of them is. The whole point of that first argument is to say it can't be this. It can't be that. So that's your first version of the existence of God. And we'll talk about some objections since we didn't get to them next time. Well, we went through most of them, but if you think of your own objections, we'll talk about those too. Dismiss, peace out.